Well, between the long lines and the pat-downs, the tiny seats and the tarmac delays, it would take the empathy of a saint to stop and worry about the comfort of the pilot. But tonight's investigation shows you exactly why you should. Yes, there was a time when the hat and the wings signified a glamorous profession, but in these days of low wages and brutal schedules, the folks up in the cockpit often have to fly through deep, relentless fatigue. And Brian Ross is here with the alarming proof. Brian?
Bill, for many airline pilots, the hardest part of the job is staying awake. Fatigue is the dirty little secret of the airline industry. A night flight over Washington, D.C., seen from the cockpit of a jet airline. It's no time for a pilot to be struggling to stay awake, but all too often, that is the case.
There's a code for it. One pilot will reach over to the other and say, hey, listen, I'm gonna examine the overhead panel for a little while.
It's the result of a system in which poorly paid pilots report to duty hundreds or thousands of miles from home and have to scrounge at night for a place to sleep, ending up in secretive so-called crash pads seen in this ABC News undercover video. Or even worse, spending the night in airline crew lounges, as seen in these pictures taken by a pilot, raising the veil on the secret life of airline pilots, a symptom of a very serious industry-wide problem.
It is a big concern. It matters. Our passengers deserve better.
2 years ago this week, a Continental regional jet from Newark, operated by Colgan Air, crashed on approach to Buffalo, killing 50 people. Neither the pilot nor the first officer slept in a bed the night before the flight. They had commuted to Newark from Florida and Washington State. Yawns could be heard on the cockpit voice recorder.
We had a captain who had actually been overnighting in the crew lounge at Newark Airport for 2 of the previous 3 nights.
The chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, Deborah Hersman, says while pilot fatigue was not formally listed as a contributing factor in the Buffalo crash, it was certainly an important issue.
We did recognize that they were likely impaired by fatigue.
And yet 2 years after the crash,
38 service to Buffalo, New York.
Major carriers and the regional airlines still have not implemented the Safety Board's recommendations about dealing with the tired skies and the fatigue of long-distance commuting pilots. So you'd show up and you were already worn out.
Yeah.
Until he quit 3 years ago, Josh Reichs was one of those commuting pilots, at first traveling from Los Angeles to fly Continental regional jets out of Newark. So regularly fatigued, he admitted, he would have to take naps in the middle of a flight.
Brian, are you asking me this question?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reich says on his starting pilot salary of $17,000 a year, he could not afford to live in Newark or even get a hotel room. With $17,000 a year to spend?
Yeah.
How'd you live there?
I lived in a crash pad.
Lived in a crash pad?
I lived in a crash pad.
It's a strange name for a place for airline pilots to sleep. But crash pads can be found within blocks of most major airports, part of an underground world that is secret only to the flying public. We saw pilots coming and going all hours of the day and night at crash pads just a few blocks from LaGuardia Airport in New York. Inside, stacks of bunk beds, 24 in all, crammed into rooms in violation of all housing and fire codes. About $25 a night. Hot bunks. Bring your own pillowcase.
It was never really good sleep.
Former Continental Express pilot Josh Verde says he too was forced to sleep in crash pads when he commuted from Florida for flights based out of Newark Airport.
You'd have people coming in and out at all hours of the night. I happened to have a bunkmate that snored louder than anyone I've ever heard in my life.
Verde says while the airlines provide hotel rooms during the middle of an actual trip, it's the night before the start of the trip when commuter pilots are scrambling for a place to sleep.
They're aware of what's going on, and I think they just sort of say, figure it out.
And many pilots can't even afford the $25 a night for a crash pad, so they end up behind the locked doors of the airport where the public can't see them, spending the night in the airline's crew lounges. The airlines say it is against the rules, but a pilot for U.S. Airways Express provided these pictures to ABC News of the crew lounges at the airports in Philadelphia and at LaGuardia.
That's disrupted sleep. You're not going to get full consolidated sleep doing that, no.
Dr. Martin Moore-Eade is a sleep expert who consults with airlines, unions, and the government on pilot fatigue.
Good sleeping occurs in a dark room, a quiet room, and a room that's cool in temperature, and a room where there's not intrusive noise.
So that's not a crew lounge.
That does not describe a crew lounge.
The pilot who took these pictures in the U.S. Airways Express crew lounges asked we not show his face and alter his voice. He says he put his job on the line so the public, and in particular members of Congress, could see what he sees every day.
That's who their pilot's going to be. Do they want a well-rested pilot when they take that 6 a.m. flight out of Washington, D.C., or do you want a guy who just slept in the crew room?
All of this is deeply disturbing to the families of the 50 people who died in the Continental Express Flight 3407 crash 2 years ago.
When that phone rang, I picked it up and he says, Scott, Lauren was on that plane and she's gone.
Since then, Scott Maurer, who lost his daughter Lauren, and others who lost loved ones, have helped to push through legislation in Congress to improve safety on the regional airlines. But Maurer says neither the airlines nor the pilots union is still willing to address the issue of commuter pilots and fatigue.
These two areas, pilots and industry, need to work closer together.
Right now, that's not happening, is it?
And right now, that's not happening.
How you doing? Thank you.
One of the few who has actually stepped up and addressed the issue is America's most famous pilot, Sully, Captain Chesley Sullenberger, who with his first officer, Jeffrey Skiles, was able to land his stricken jet in the Hudson River off New York City.
I'm convinced that had we been tired, had we not gotten sufficient rest the night before, we could not have performed at the same level. The fact that we got so much, so right, so quickly under that sudden stress is a testament not only to our training, but the fact that we had a chance to get sufficient rest.
The kind of rest far too many pilots fail to get every single night. The administrator of the FAA told us he was surprised to learn of our findings, that the airlines had denied to him that their crew lounges are used by pilots as bedrooms, as our footage shows.